I'm Becky Sayers, aka @MissSayers1, aka the passionately boring teacher, and this is my history how-to about knowledge organisers. So this is the sheet that I'm going to work through, and the first thing I want to talk about is what a knowledge organiser actually is. So there's my definition up on the screen. I'm not going to read through it, but what I am going to talk about is the two main schools of thought when it comes to knowledge organisers. So some people advocate using a grid format in which you essentially just have the piece of information or pieces of information laid out in a table, much like this. I personally prefer what I call the prose format or the diagram format, in which that information is usually in the form of bullet points or a diagram or something that connects the different pieces of knowledge together. I'm not saying that one is better than the other, I'm just saying that I prefer to use this style, and I think that most of the advice that I'm going to give you in this video can be applied to either style of knowledge organiser. So Daisy Christodoulou has emphasised on many occasions the importance both of background knowledge and knowledge generally when learning. And there's a fantastic quotation from an article she wrote a few years ago: if we fail to teach knowledge, pupils fail to learn. So we should be teaching knowledge, and Kirshner, Sweller and Clark define learning as a change in long-term memory. So we want pupils to learn knowledge, we need to get them to learn that by getting a change in the long-term memory, and then if we combine that with Willingham's model of memory, we can get a good idea of why knowledge organisers are so important. Now hopefully you're going to be able to see my cursor, which you can. So essentially I view knowledge organisers as a way of defining the most important pieces of knowledge that should go through this cycle, and then using that knowledge organiser to make sure that it goes through, that knowledge goes through that cycle as many times as possible so that it gets embedded in the long-term memory. And there are a variety of different ways that this can be done. So the title of this slide is Using Knowledge Organisers in the Classroom. I tend to generally use knowledge organisers for homework, but I'm going to talk through each one. So, in its most basic form, using look, cover, say, write, check. I think this is a really good example of where grid knowledge organisers work really well, essentially sending a student home or giving a student some time with a well-written grid-style knowledge organiser and getting them to use that technique, which I'm not a primary school teacher, but it's possible they would have practiced at primary school, can allow them to rehearse that knowledge. At my school we use quiz booklets, which I'm going to go into in a bit more detail. We can also use them, and I also use them in in-class scaffolding, so if I'm doing a revision session or if I know a student maybe isn't massively secure on knowledge that they're going to need to answer a question, then having the knowledge organiser page there is a really good quick support that they can use. And I also think they're fantastic as use as cover work, and that's largely working with these quiz booklets that I'm going to talk about in a minute. So knowledge organisers in the classroom and how I use them. So I'm just going to focus on quiz booklets because that is the main way that I use them. I really don't tend to use knowledge organisers in the classroom. So to give you an idea of the overall structure of how I kind of input information, most lessons, or actually probably every other lesson, because a learning cycle is probably over about 2 lessons, so the first lesson in each of these cycles we will probably spend doing a piece of reading and then picking apart that reading, manipulating the knowledge within it, and then turning that into a piece of our own writing. So their first bit of input will be a piece of reading. Then they'll go home, and when they go home they'll have this knowledge organiser. Now this knowledge organiser has been custom made, and it was made in conjunction with the resources. In fact, what I tend to do is I resource the lesson and then I write the knowledge organiser page. And students will be given a quiz booklet. So the questions line up exactly with the knowledge organiser page, which lines up exactly with the knowledge that they were given in the lesson. You can ask pupils to write their own questions, and originally we did that. What we found was that it tended to emphasise the Matthew effect. More able pupils, pupils who wrote very quickly, pupils who were able to write confidently, were able to write a lot of high quality nuanced questions that provided them with really high quality revision materials later down the line, whereas lower prior attaining pupils, pupils below reading age, pupils who weren't confident writers often wrote very few low quality questions, and the time that it was taking to ensure that everybody had high quality questions was substantially eating into lesson time. So that's why we give pupils our questions that we've written, to try and make sure that we ensure high quality for all students. So students will go home, they will, in fact, there we go, I have the instructions, they'll go home, read the knowledge organiser, explain the knowledge organiser from memory to someone else, and then with the knowledge organiser in front of them, they'll answer the questions in the quiz booklet. That's kind of the first round of homework. They'll bring that booklet in, I'll check that they've done it, and then we'll mark those answers as a class, and every teacher is provided with a pre-written answer booklet to make that as consistent and easy as possible. Once they've done that first round and they have a set of correct answers in their quiz booklet, they will then go back and use that quiz booklet to do what we call re-quizzing. So it's a similar process, except this time pupils are doing it entirely from memory on scrap paper, and it is very much focused on retrieval practice. And then if they need further support, or if they don't understand one of the answers in their quiz booklet, they can go back to that knowledge organiser to support them further. This is also what we use for cover work, so we have a pre-printed set of answer booklets and knowledge organisers for all the previous topics that pupils have done, which are available for cover, which means that pupils will then spend that lesson, as long as it's a one-off cover, they will spend that lesson testing themselves on the knowledge of that knowledge organiser, and they have it there if they need it. So that's how we use knowledge organisers in lessons. In theory, if there's a grid format, it can be simplified using look, cover, say, write, check as well. So some do's and don'ts for knowledge organisers. First of all, I think it's really, really important that knowledge organisers are not standalone texts, which is going to come from the don't section. They've got to be well incorporated, customised documents that fit exactly with the input and the schema that has been established in lessons. So I think it's really important that you discuss your content with other teachers and take advantage of knowledge from other topics. So a really good example of this is one of the members of my team who is currently writing a knowledge organiser about the English Civil War, has had a lot of conversations, with the teacher who planned the unit on the Reformation in the previous year to make sure that they're taking advantage of prior knowledge that pupils will have, and they'll still have their quiz booklets and knowledge organisers from previous topics as well. This is a bit of a controversial one because, as I said, there's the grid format and then there's the prose format, the diagram format. I do think that knowledge organisers should have diagrams and graphic knowledge organisers to clarify complex concepts. Christodoulou talks a lot about this idea of building a schema and connecting knowledge together, and I think sometimes the grid format can make facts a little disconnected or abstract, and I think if you are going to go for the narrative or diagram style, then using the graphic organisers not only gives pupils the core knowledge that they need, but also helps to scaffold making those connections between those pieces of knowledge, and also including a keywords list, either for the subject generally or for the page itself. I tend to, if I go back to my example, I tend to include a keywords list for the page itself to make sure that those pupils who might have a lower reading age can access this as easily as possible. These definitions are centrally organised on a spreadsheet. They're the exact same definitions that we teach in lessons. They're the exact same definitions, there we go, that we've talked about when we've done readings in lessons. So, our don'ts then. First of all, I would advise not to use off-the-shelf knowledge organisers because they will not line up with your schema, or they will only partially line up with your schema, which has the potential to be incredibly overwhelming for pupils. My experience, because I have done this in the past and it has gone badly, is that your higher priority pupils tend to panic and think, oh well, I've got to learn all of this as well, and maybe there's all this other stuff that I don't know that isn't on the knowledge organiser and this hasn't told me. Lower prior retaining pupils tend to find it really overwhelming and find it too much of a barrier, and it makes it much more likely that they'll give in. Don't include long paragraphs. The point of knowledge organisers is not to get pupils to practice learning, it's to make that knowledge as accessible as possible, and so those bullet points of diagrams are really advisable. This is a really tricky one. Don't include information which is interesting rather than necessary. In my first round of knowledge organisers, I included things like interesting quotations, and again, it's just really overwhelming. And the question I ask myself when I'm writing a knowledge organiser is, am I expecting pupils to memorise this, or do pupils need to memorise this? If the answer is no, it doesn't need to be on the knowledge organiser. And that feeds in really well to that last bullet point, don't include further tasks on the page itself. I would say that the best possible approach with knowledge organisers is having a standard format that you follow in terms of how pupils should engage with those knowledge organisers. We have these 2 diagrams on the back of all of the quiz booklets, the back of the knowledge organisers. We have a display up in the corridor, we have a homework lesson for year 7, so it's absolutely crystal clear how pupils should be using those knowledge organisers, and it really minimises that margin of error, but also allows pupils to engage with the content and feel successful. Okay, so that's all our do's and don'ts. So ways that it can be used and ways that I've used it in the past. I use a lot of flowcharts and graphic organisers to show causation. Timelines are really helpful for not just showing dates, but showing how those dates fit together. Annotated maps, not just for geography, but for history as well, and also key individuals. And in terms of further reading, Make It Stick, I think, is just generally really good for the principles that lie behind knowledge organisers. Similarly, Reading Reconsidered talks really well about the importance of background knowledge, and September 2018 of the Impact Journal of the Chartered College of Teaching had a really good article about knowledge organisers in them as well. So thank you so much for listening. If you have any questions, my Twitter handle is at the beginning of the video, it's @MissSayers1, and thank you so much for getting involved in the History How To's project. Okay, thank you.